Once a waitress, always a waitress. Somebody get this girl an apron. My mother-in-law announced it to a ballroom of 300 people, and then she flicked a full glass of Cabernet across my white dress like she was putting out a candle. The mayor was 10 feet away. My husband was frozen at table 12. And Vivienne, smirking, had absolutely no idea that she had just thrown wine at the woman who owns the Whitmore Country Club. Every chandelier, every camera, and the membership contract with her name on it, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up 6 years because the wine is not the story. The wine is just the last drop. My name is Dana. I'm 34, and I met my husband Eric when I was 27 at a corporate dinner his law firm hosted. I wasn't a guest, I was the caterer. I had started a catering company at 24, with a used van, a second-hand convection oven, and about $400 of confidence. And by the time I met Eric, Fig and Time Catering was doing events for half the firms downtown. That night one of my servers went home sick, so I put on an apron and worked the floor myself, because that's what you do when it's your name on the van. Eric asked me for a bourbon. I told him the bar was to his left, and the woman running this entire event was standing in front of him. He laughed, turned red, and asked for my number instead. I liked him immediately. I should have paid more attention to the first dinner with his parents. His father Richard was lovely, soft-spoken, kind eyes, the type of man who refills your water glass without being asked. His mother Vivienne was 60 then, blonde in the way that costs $400 a month, and she shook my hand like I was handing her a coat. When Eric mentioned I owned a catering company, she smiled and said, "Oh, how sweet. So you cook for people." Not a question. A filing decision. Frey. She had met me for 11 minutes and already put me in a drawer labeled staff. I told myself it was one comment. Everyone gets one comment. 6 months later at a family barbecue. I was carrying a tray of deviled eggs I'd made to the patio table when I heard Vivienne on the other side of the screen door, talking to Eric's aunt. She didn't know I was there. She said, and I will remember the exact sentence until I die. "Eric's sweet, but he's confused the help for a wife. It happens to men his age. It'll pass." The aunt laughed. I stood there holding 48 deviled eggs, and then I walked out smiling and served them, because I was 28 years old and I still believed that if I was gracious enough, long enough, she would come around. I want to be honest with you about that, because it's the part I'm least proud of. I spent years trying to earn a seat at a table I should have flipped much sooner. Eric proposed a year later, and Vivienne responded to our engagement the way other people respond to a diagnosis. She offered to pay for the wedding. Generous, right? Except the offer came with her guest list, her venue, her menu, and her suggestion that my family might be more comfortable at a smaller event the weekend before. Eric shut that down. I'll give him credit. We paid for our own wedding, 110 guests, and my company catered it because my food is genuinely the best in the city, and I wanted our people fed properly. At the reception, Vivienne stood up, unasked, clinked her glass, and gave a toast that included the line, "And who knows, if things don't work out, at least Eric will never go hungry, because Dana can always fall back on serving." People laughed the uncomfortable laugh. Richard whispered, "That's just how she is." I heard that sentence so many times over the next 6 years that it stopped sounding like an apology and started sounding like a policy. That became the rhythm of my marriage. In public, Vivienne was warm honey, charity boards, garden club, the Whitmore Country Club spring gala committee, where she'd been a fixture for 2 decades. In private, and in that special half-public zone where she could claim it was a joke, she chipped at me constantly. She introduced me at her Christmas party as Eric's little friend. We had been married 2 years. When I corrected her gently, his wife, she touched my arm and told the guests, she's sensitive about titles. Service people often are. At Easter at her house I found my place card at the folding table with the children. 7 kids and me. She said the adult table was for family, and then she watched my face to see if I'd make a scene. I didn't. I ate chicken nuggets with a 6-year-old named Tyler, who honestly, was better company than anyone at the main table. Eric confronted her more than once. I want that on the record, because people always ask. He would sit her down and say, "Mom, you have to stop," and she would cry instantly, on command, like turning a faucet, and say she was only teasing, that Dana was too fragile, that she was trying so hard and nothing she did was ever good enough for me. By the end of every one of those conversations, somehow Eric was comforting her. That's a skill, by the way. I've watched a woman turn her own son's complaint into his apology in under 10 minutes. Richard would stand in the doorway during these performances looking like a man watching weather, sad about it. Doing nothing the 3rd year is when things quietly changed, though nobody in that family noticed. 2 things happened 4 months apart. First, I sold Fig and Time, a national hospitality group had been circling for a year. I had the downtown corporate contracts, the airport lounge contract, the 2 best wedding venues in the county locked into exclusives. They made an offer, my lawyer made it bigger, boom, and at 31 years old I signed papers that changed my life. I'm not going to pretend to be modest about the number. Because you need it to understand everything that comes after. After taxes and paying out my team's bonuses, I walked away with a little over $9 million. Eric knew, obviously. We told his parents over dinner that I had sold the company. Vivian set down her fork, tilted her head with that syrup smile and said, "Oh honey, the little sandwich job finally folded? Well, maybe now you can focus on giving me grandchildren." She had decided years ago that my company was a hobby, and no fact was going to survive contact with that decision. Eric started to correct her, and I put my hand on his knee under the table. I don't fully know why I did that, full to all. Some part of me had already stopped wanting her to know anything true about me. The second thing happened at our 5th anniversary dinner. And this is the moment everything actually turned. So I want to slow down here. Eric booked the private dining room at the Whitmore Country Club. Vivian's club, the crown jewel of her social life. The place where she'd spent 20 years air-kissing her way up the committee ladder. She invited herself to our anniversary dinner. She actually called the club, found out about the reservation, and added herself and Richard to it. And Eric found out when we arrived and there were 4 chairs. Over dessert, she raised her glass, looked around the beautiful room, and gave a toast. To Eric, she said, "Who could have had anyone in this room, any of these families?" She gestured, at the members dining nearby, the daughters of the club, the pearls and the trust funds. But love makes its own choices and we've all learned to live with them. Then she smiled at me. "Haven't we, Dana? You must love it here. It must be like a little vacation from your world." I looked at her, and I felt something I never felt in 6 years of swallowing it, which was nothing. No sting, no heat behind my eyes. Just a very calm, very clear voice in the back of my head that said, "You're done being hurt by this woman. Start thinking." People always want to know if I bought the club because of her. Here's the honest answer: 70% no, 30% absolutely yes. The no part. I had $9 million, 15 years of hospitality expertise, and a broker sending me acquisition listings, because operating businesses is what I do. I was never going to sit on that money and take pottery classes, and the Whitmore was, underneath the chandeliers, a genuinely mismanaged asset. The founding family that owned it had been bleeding it for a decade. Deferred maintenance, a kitchen running on equipment older than me, dues raised every year while the product got worse. My broker flagged that the family was quietly shopping it 2 weeks after that anniversary dinner. 2 weeks. Sometimes the universe just slides a folder across the table and looks at you. The 30% yes part, I'll own it. When I saw the listing, I laughed out loud alone in my kitchen, and it was not a nice laugh. I bought the Whitmore Country Club through a company I set up called Meridian Hospitality LLC. That's a limited liability company, which for this story just means one thing. My name is nowhere on anything a member would ever see. The purchase closed quietly. These deals always do. Nobody wants members panicking. And the founding family stayed on the letterhead for a transition year, as club ambassadors. I kept the general manager, fired the accountants, spent almost $2 million on renovations, fixed the kitchen, raised the food quality, and yes, restructured the dues. Every member got a letter from Meridian Hospitality. I know for a fact Vivian read hers, because at Thanksgiving that year, she complained for 10 straight minutes about some faceless corporation buying her club and raising her dues $140 a month. She looked right at me while she said it. "You wouldn't understand, Dana. Institutions like the Whitmore matter to people like us." I passed her the green beans and said the new owners probably knew what they were doing. Eric choked on his water. He's the only other person on earth who knew, and keeping that secret at that table became, I'm not going to lie to you, one of the great joys of our marriage. So that's the situation heading into this past spring. For 3 years, sirs, 36 months of dues if you're counting, and Vivienne wrote a check to my company every month, so she could sit in my dining room and call me the help. A lot of people have asked me why I sat on it for 3 years, so let me take you inside those years, because holding a card that heavy is harder than it sounds. I almost told her at least 4 times. The closest was 2 Christmases ago. Vivienne was holding court in her living room, telling her garden club friends that I was between things, since my little business closed, and one of the friends, trying to be kind, asked what I planned to do next. And Vivienne answered for me. She patted my hand and said, "We're hoping Eric's job means Dana won't have to work at all. She's had enough hard years on her feet." I had the sentence loaded. I could feel it sitting behind my teeth. "Actually, Carol, I own the Whitmore. Your husband's membership renewal is on my desk." And then I looked across the room at Richard, watching me with those sad kind eyes, doing his little pleading face, "Please, not at Christmas," and I swallowed it. Again. On the drive home, Eric said, "You almost did it," and I said, "Not yet." And he said, "You're waiting for something, aren't you?" And I realized I was. I couldn't have told you what. It turns out I was waiting for her to hand me a stage. Here's a detail I need you to hold on to. The general manager I kept on, and the front desk manager, a woman named Marisol, who has worked the Whitmore desk for 11 years. They obviously knew who I was. I did my owner's visits on Tuesday mornings when the club is dead. But the Whitmore was also my mother-in-law's second home, so a couple of times a year our worlds crossed. Once, at a member's funeral reception, Marisol saw me walk in and lit up. "Miss Dana, we didn't know you'd be," and caught my face and landed it perfectly. "Joining the family today." Vivian watched this exchange and narrowed her eyes, and for 1 second I thought she'd figured it out. Bruh. Then she leaned toward her friend and stage whispered, "The staff love her. Takes one to know one, I suppose." She was handed the thread that unraveled everything, and she used it to make a joke about my apron. I think about that a lot. People see exactly what they've already decided to see. Which brings us to the Spring Gala. The Whitmore Spring Gala is the biggest night of the club's year. 300 guests, black tie, a silent auction for the Children's Hospital, the mayor and his wife at the head table. And this year mattered to Vivienne more than any year of her life, because the club's board of governors had an open seat, and she had spent months campaigning for it. The board is elected by members, but everyone knows the new owners. The faceless corporation approved the slate. She talked about that seat all winter. At Sunday dinners she rehearsed her little speeches on us. "The Whitmore is a family," she'd say, testing the line, "and families need standards." Eric would look at me across the table with an expression I can only describe as a man watching two trains and unable to stop grinning about it. I need to tell you what I was wearing, because it matters. White. A white floor-length dress I'd bought for the evening, because the owner of the club was attending her own gala, even if only 2 people in the ballroom knew it. Eric's whole family had a table. Vivienne had arranged it, table 12. And she'd introduced me around the cocktail hour as, I swear on my life, Eric's wife Dana. She used to be in food service, so tonight must be very exciting for her. 3 separate times. The third time she added a little wink to the wife of a bank president, like they were sharing something. I drank my sparkling water and smiled. And under the smile I was watching my banquet team work the floor, noting that table 9's service was slow, the way you do when it's your name on the van, even when the van is now a $19 million club. Rule. Halfway through dinner service it happened. A young server named Katie, 19, 3 weeks on the job, sweet kid who'd been shaking all night because someone told her the mayor was here, caught her heel on a chair leg near our table, and went down with a full tray. 8 entrees, glassware, the whole catastrophe, a sound like a car crash made of china. The ballroom did that thing where everyone gasps and then pretends not to look. Katie was on her knees in the wreckage, scarlet, close to tears, grabbing at broken plates with her bare hands, and nobody moved. 300 people in gowns and tuxedos watched a teenager bleed toward broken glass, and nobody moved. So I moved. Of course I moved. I was on my knees next to her before I thought about it. The way you'd catch a falling cup, 12 years of muscle memory. I told her, "Hey, look at me. This is nothing. This happens every single night somewhere. We're fine." I took the broken glass out of her hands, stacked it on the tray myself, and got her breathing again. That's it. That's the whole crime. That is what I was doing when Vivienne saw her moment. Because you have to understand what this looked like to Vivienne. 6 years of story finally proven true. The daughter-in-law, on her knees, in front of the mayor, in front of the bank president's wife, in front of the board seat, bussing dishes at the spring gala. Every ugly thing she'd ever said about me, illustrated, in white, on the ballroom floor. She stood up. She actually pushed her chair back so it would scrape. And in the voice she uses for toasts, the voice built to reach the cheap seats, she laughed and said, "Well, there it is. Once a waitress, always a waitress. Somebody get this girl an apron." A few people laughed, the reflex laugh people give a confident woman at a party. I stood up, and I looked at her, and I didn't shrink, and I think that's what did it. She needed me to shrink. Instead I stood there in my white dress with a bar towel in my hand, looking at her the way you look at a problem you've already solved. And something flickered in her face, and she reached for her wine. I watched her decide to do it. That's the part I'll never forget. It wasn't a fit of passion. There was a full second, maybe 2, where she looked at the glass, looked at my dress, and chose. Then she flicked her wrist, almost elegant, and a full pour of Cabernet went across my chest and up my neck and along my jaw, and the last of it dripped off my chin onto the ballroom floor of the club I own. The sound in the room changed. 300 conversations dying at once, chairs creaking as people turned. The mayor's wife put her hand over her mouth. Katie, the server, made a small sound like she'd been the one hit. Eric was up out of his chair so fast it tipped over, and Richard had Vivienne's arm, whispering, frantic, and she shook him off and delivered her closer to the room, playing to her audience like she'd already won the seat. "Someone get this waitress out of here. This is a private club. There are standards." And here's the thing I want you to know about that moment. I wasn't angry. I had spent 6 years being angry in small doses, and standing there with wine running down my dress, I felt the whole weight of it just set down. Somewhere in the ballroom, a phone camera was already up. Vivian smoothed her gown and turned back toward her table, with the satisfied look of a woman who has finally taken out the trash in front of everyone who matters. I picked my napkin up off the table. I folded it once, I set it down next to my plate. And I walked, not toward the exit, which is what she expected, and not toward her, which is what Eric expected, but toward the stage, where the 12-piece band was pretending very hard to be sheet music. The bandleader, Tony, has played the Whitmore for 9 years. He knows exactly who signs the checks. I held out my hand and Tony didn't even hesitate. He cut the band with one gesture, lifted the microphone off the stand, and handed it to me with a little nod, like he'd been waiting 9 years for this too. 300 faces turned toward the stage. Vivienne was still mid-law with the bank president's wife when she noticed the music had stopped. I tapped the microphone twice. It thumped through the ballroom like a heartbeat. "Good evening, everyone," I said. "Most of you don't know me. That's about to change. Okay, this is the part everyone has been waiting for. And I'm going to slow down and give it to you exactly the way it happened. Because I have replayed it maybe 400 times, and I want you to have every second of it." I stood on that stage in a wine-soaked white dress, holding the microphone, and for a moment I just looked at the room. 300 people in black tie, forks down, dessert melting, every face turned toward the woman they'd just watched get a glass of Cabernet thrown on her. From up there I could see the whole geography of my life. Table 12, where Eric stood next to his tipped-over chair with his hand over his mouth. And I want to be clear, that wasn't fear on his face. My husband was watching 6 years of Sunday dinners arrive at the station. Behind the far tables near the service doors, my banquet staff had stopped moving entirely. Marisol had come out from the front desk and was standing in the doorway with her hands clasped like she was at church. And dead center, at the best table her committee status could buy, Vivienne, still flushed with her win, dabbing her lips with a napkin, whispering something to the bank president's wife that I would have bet money was about my exit. "Good evening, everyone. Most of you don't know me, that's about to change." I let it sit. Public speaking tip from 12 years of running events. Silence does more work than words. If you can stand it, I could stand it. "My name is Dana," I said. For those in the back who couldn't see, I'm the woman who was just told to leave. So before I go, I want to say a few things because it's my microphone. Confused laughter a few places. People thought it was a bit. The mayor's wife was not laughing. She was leaning forward. First, Katie. I found her at the edge of the room, still holding the broken tray, mascara everywhere. Katie has worked here 3 weeks. Frey. Tonight she carried her first full tray through a gala for 300 people. And she caught a chair's leg, which has happened to every single person who has ever worked a floor, including me. Including at an event for a governor, which is a story I'll tell you another time. Katie, you're doing great. Don't let anybody in this room tell you different. My staff started clapping. Then, weirdly, wonderfully, some of the guests did too. That guilty clapping people do when they've just watched a teenager cry alone on a floor and did nothing. Vivienne rolled her eyes, big enough to see from the stage, and reached for someone else's wine, since hers was on me. She still thought she was watching my farewell speech. Second, I said. Tonight's gala supports the Children's Hospital, and the silent auction closes in 40 minutes. 4. And I'd like to see this room break last year's record. So don't let what happens next slow anybody down. A ripple went through the tables. What happens next? I watched 300 people arrive, at slightly different speeds, at the understanding that something was in fact about to happen. Third, I took a breath. 3 years ago, the Whitmore Country Club was sold. You all got the letter. Some of you have complained about the letter every month since. Knowing laughter, the dues crowd. The club was purchased by a company called Meridian Hospitality, and members have spent 3 years asking who that is. You've called it the Faceless Corporation. One member, I won't say who, has spent all spring campaigning for the board seat by promising to, and I quote, make the new owners respect what the Whitmore stands for. Vivian stopped mid-sip. I have watched the video of this moment more times than I will ever admit, because a guest at table 5 caught her face in the corner of the frame. And you can see the whole thing happen in her eyes, in order, like floors lighting up in an elevator. Confusion. Then arithmetic. Then the memory. I'd bet my company on it. Of Marisol at that funeral lighting up at me. Miss Dana, we didn't know you'd be. Then the arrival. I'm Meridian Hospitality, I said. I bought this club 3 years ago after I sold my catering company, Fee. I renovated the kitchen you all ate from tonight. I hired most of the people who served you. Every membership renewal in this room for 36 months has crossed my desk, so when I say welcome to my club, I mean that in the least figurative way available. The ballroom went silent. Actually, honestly, physically silent. The kind you can feel on your skin, 300 people not chewing, not whispering. A single champagne cork somewhere in the back going off like a gunshot and nobody even turning toward it. And then the sound came back all at once. Everyone at the same time. And underneath the roar of it, the bank president's wife stood up at Vivienne's table and moved, physically picked up her clutch and moved, 2 seats away from her. That, before I said another word about anyone. The wine on my dress hadn't dried yet and the room had already redistributed itself. Vivienne stood up, credit where it's due. The woman does not fold quietly. She laughed, a beautiful, poised, this absurd laugh, and said, loudly enough for the room, oh sweetheart, don't be ridiculous. You catered parties. Like it was a diagnosis. Like the word waitress was a wall I could not possibly have gotten over. Even then, staring at me on the stage of my own gala, holding my microphone, she could not fit the true thing into her head. Because for 6 years the story that I was beneath her hadn't been an opinion she held. It was the floor she stood on, so I took it out from under her. Marisol, I said, who signs your paycheck? Marisol, from the doorway, 11 years at that desk, said clear as a bell. You do. Miss Dana Tony, who approved the band's contract in January. Tony leaned into his mic, deadpan, one hand still holding his trumpet. You did, boss. The drummer, who I have never spoken to in my life, hit a little rim shot, and I could have kissed him. I turned back to Vivienne, and here's where I stopped enjoying it. Or at least where the enjoyment turned into something colder and older. Because the room had gone from stunned to entertained. And I didn't want her entertained out of the building. I wanted this exact and on the record. Now for the unpleasant part, I said. Every membership at the Whitmore is a contract with Meridian Hospitality, and that contract has a conduct clause. Section 9. Members who assault, abuse, or degrade staff or guests on club property are subject to immediate revocation. In 3 years I have never once used it. I have warned exactly 4 members for how they spoke to my servers. And all 4 corrected themselves, because most people, whatever else is true of them, do not throw drinks at human beings. I let that hang there. Then I looked directly at my mother-in-law across 300 people. 4. Tonight, in front of this entire room, a member of this club threw a glass of wine on a guest and demanded staff remove her. The ballroom cameras caught all of it. There are 6 of them. They're excellent. I bought them. So Vivienne. Her name landed on the room like a dropped tray. Plenty of these people knew her. Some of them, I realized watching their faces, were only now assembling that the wine thrower and the owner were in the same family. Your membership at the Whitmore Country Club is revoked, effective tonight, under Section 9. 4. Your board candidacy goes with it. Since candidates have to be members, and since you've spent 6 years telling me I belong in the kitchen, you know the way out. It's through there. You can see it from your seat. Now you get to leave through it. I want to describe the next 90 seconds carefully, because the video only caught part of it and people always ask. She didn't move at first. She stood at her table with her chin up, waiting. I genuinely believe this. For the room to rally. For 20 years the Whitmore had been her theater, and she was waiting for her audience to boo the villain off the stage. And the room just didn't. The mayor's wife turned fully around in her chair to watch her, the way you watch weather. A man at the next table, some golf friend of Richard's, studied the tablecloth. The bank president's wife, from her new seat 2 chairs down, said something quiet, and I found out later from 3 separate people what it was. Marion's committee never wanted you on that slate anyway, which had nothing to do with me, and everything to do with what happens to a certain kind of queen the exact second the crown is off. The court had been keeping receipts for years. They were just waiting for permission. My head of security is a gentle giant named Dale. 26 years at the club, like a mascot costume. Dale approached her table and said, the video caught this, ma'am, I'll walk you. Not a threat. Almost kind. And Vivienne, out of moves, chose the last available character, the martyr. She snatched her wrap off the chair, announced to no one in particular, this club died tonight, and let Dale walk her the long way around the dance floor, past table after table of people she had lunched with for 2 decades, every one of them suddenly fascinated by their dessert. Richard scrambled up and followed her with her clutch, which she had forgotten, and that detail breaks my heart a little even now. A 66-year-old man trotting after his wife, carrying her purse through the wreckage of her whole social life. At the service doors, she stopped. She turned around, and she found me on the stage, and for 2 full seconds we just looked at each other across the ballroom. I don't know what she was looking for, an undo button maybe. What she said, and only the staff by the doors heard it. Katie told me later, was, tell Eric to call me. Not sorry, not even anger. Just an order, placed with the staff on her way through the kitchen. Then the doors swung shut behind her, and somebody's aunt at table 19 said, into the quiet, well, I'm bidding on the spa package. And the whole room broke. Laughter, chaos, the band kicking back in, Tony calling out, this one goes out to Section 9. I stepped down off the stage and my legs were shaking, which surprised me. Eric met me at the bottom step. He didn't say anything clever. He took my face in both hands, wine and all, and said, 6 years. You held that for 6 years. And I said 36 months technically, and he laughed until he had to sit down. Here's what happened in the week after, and I'm going to move fast because the consequences did. The video was in the family group chat before Vivienne's car left my parking lot. A cousin's husband at table 14 had caught almost everything. The wine, the speech, the walk. By Sunday it had jumped the family fence. Somebody's kid posted a clip, and it did the thing clips do. By Monday morning I had 2 local news requests which I declined, and the club had, I am not exaggerating, 41 membership applications. Apparently owner publicly defends teenage server is the best advertisement in the hospitality industry. Who knew? Everyone. Everyone knew. Monday, the club's board announced the final candidate slate for the open seat. Vivienne's name was not on it, because Vivienne was not a member. The seat went in June to a retired pediatric surgeon, who had bid $9,000 on the spa package at the gala, so I'd say the Whitmore came out ahead. Wednesday, the Children's Hospital Charity Board, where Vivienne had been social chair for 11 years, held what they called a restructuring conversation. I had nothing to do with it, and I need people to believe that, because the story got told later like I made a call. I made no calls. But the charity holds its gala, its winter luncheon, and its donor dinner at the Whitmore, and the wine throw happened at their own event, on camera, in front of their donors. They restructured her off the board by Friday. The garden club didn't even restructure. They just moved the May meeting to a member's house, and didn't tell her the address. There is no cruelty on earth as efficient as the cruelty of people who were only ever nice to you because you had leverage. I spent one whole evening feeling something adjacent to pity about it. Eric found me on the porch and asked what was wrong, and I said, her entire life was that club, and he was quiet for a second and then said, so was yours, Dana. She threw wine on it. I went back inside. The dues. Since 11,000 of you will ask. Yes, 36 months, at the rate her tier paid. Vivienne and Richard had paid Meridian Hospitality a little over $28,000 while she was calling me the help. Her final statement went out with the revocation letter, prorated to the day, because I run a clean shop. She owed the club for one last item. The gala's per plate charge for guests at member tables. She had after all attended. It has been 4 months since the gala, and this last part is the part I didn't see coming, so pull up a chair. The calls started that first Sunday. Not from Vivienne, from the perimeter. Eric's aunt, the deviled egg logger from the barbecue 6 years ago, texted me. Sweetie, this has gone too far. She's devastated. You've made your point. I did not answer. A cousin called Eric to explain that public embarrassment is worse than a little wine. And Eric said, then she shouldn't have thrown it in public, and hung up. And I married that man all over again in my kitchen. By the end of week 2, my phone showed 38 missed calls from numbers connected to that family. I kept a little log for a while, out of professional habit. The messages came in 3 flavors, always in the same order. First, anger. You planned this. You humiliated a 66-year-old woman for a splash of wine. Then bargaining. She's willing to sit down and clear the air if you'll reinstate the membership before the member guest tournament. I want you to read that one again. Before the tournament. Then, finally, the quiet ones. The ones that arrived late at night. The house is really hard right now. Nobody comes call her. Vivienne herself held out 19 days. Then she left one voicemail. I listened to it once, standing in my kitchen, and I can quote the opening because it is a masterpiece of its genre. Dana, this nonsense has gone on long enough. I'm sorry you took a private family moment and turned it into a spectacle, and I'm sorry you felt the need to embarrass Richard, who did nothing. But I am willing to move past this. Call me back and we'll discuss the club. I'm sorry you took it that way, dressed up for dinner. I did not call back. I saved the voicemail though. Some things you frame. Richard was different. And Richard is the reason I can't tell this story as a comedy. He called Eric 8 days after the gala and asked, voice barely working, if he could come see me. Me, specifically. He showed up on our porch on a Tuesday holding, of all things, a box of pastries from the bakery near their house, because that family apologizes in baked goods or not at all. And then this soft-spoken man who had spent 6 years whispering, that's just how she is, sat at my kitchen table and cried. Really cried, the way men his age do, like it's a machine they've never operated. He said he'd watched the video 11 times. He said the part he couldn't get past wasn't the wine. It was the kids' table, that he'd personally moved my place card at that Easter because Vivienne told him to. And he did it. And he watched me eat chicken nuggets with the children and told himself it wasn't worth a fight. I kept the peace, he said, and I let her spend it all on you. Then he said the only apology from that whole family that has ever actually landed. I'm not sorry you felt anything. I'm sorry for what I did. I was there every time, and I chose easy, every time. I let him back in. Not all at once. Trust is a tab and his was long, but he's at my table twice a month now. He comes alone. That was his choice, and I never asked for it, and I think it cost him things at home I'll never fully know. He and Eric golf on Saturdays at the Whitmore on a guest pass, because Richard's membership went down with the ship, and he has never once asked me to restore it. Last month he brought Katie, my server, the one from the tray, a graduation card, because he'd heard from Marisol that she'd finished her associate degree. He's a good man who was a coward for 6 years, and he's decided to spend whatever's left being the other thing. I'm letting him. That's the whole arrangement. Vivienne came to the house exactly once. Late September, unannounced, a Saturday, flee. I opened the door and there she was on my porch in full armor, the good coat, the hair done, holding a white, bakery box passport. She'd rehearsed. I could see the speech sitting behind her eyes. She got out the opening. Dana, I've come because this family needs healing. And I'm sorry you took what happened at the gala the way you did. And I just didn't have the 6 years left that the conversation would have needed. I took the box because the almond croissants from that bakery are genuinely excellent and I contain multitudes. And I said, thank you for these. The club has a waitlist now, Vivienne. So do I. And I closed the door, not slammed. Closed gently the way you close a door on a room you're done renovating. Through the window I watched her stand there for a moment, recalculating, and then walk back to her car. And Eric came around the corner with his coffee and asked who it was. And I handed him a croissant. She hosts Thanksgiving in 3 weeks, I'm told. Aunt Carol let it slip to Eric. The guest list is currently 4 people. Down from the 19 it was the year I ate at the kids' table. The big dining room, the good china, the seating chart she used to wield like a weapon, 4 people. Richard will be there. Because he's her husband and he's decided he can be sorry and stay, which is his mountain to carry, not mine. Eric and I will be at our house, 4. And here's who's coming to ours. My parents, Eric's cousin who called the wine Asal, in the group chat on night 1 and never wavered. Richard for dessert, Marisol and her kids, Tony if the band's not booked, and Katie, who has nowhere else to go this year and didn't have to say it twice. And here's the last picture I'll leave you with, the one I actually think about when people ask if I regret anything. This past weekend the club held its first annual staff appreciation dinner. My idea, my budget, first item I approved for the new fiscal year. Full ballroom service, but reversed. Members volunteered to serve and the staff sat. 110 employees at the good tables under the chandeliers. Katie sat at the head table, because she's floor captain now. 3 weeks of experience turned into 18 months and a promotion she earned twice over. Dale wore a tuxedo. Tony played, then handed his trumpet to his second and came and ate. And I sat at the head table too, the owner's seat at the front of the room, at the exact table where, 6 years running, there had never once been a place card with my name on it. Eric raised a glass and toasted, the best hire the Whitmore ever made, and everybody thought he meant Katie, and only I knew he was looking at me. The wine came out of the dress, by the way. Mostly, I kept it anyway, for it hangs in the back of my closet with a faint pink shadow across the chest, and I will never wear again, and I will never get rid of it. Some receipts you keep, so now I'm asking you, honestly, because the family is split and the internet will be too. Revoking the membership on camera, free in front of 300 people. Taking the board seat and the ballroom and 20 years of her social life in seconds. Was that justice or was that too far? Would you have done it quietly in an office on Monday morning? Or, does a woman who throws wine in public deserve to lose everything in public? Tell me what you would have done with that microphone in your hand.